Please go to elithecomputerguy.com in order to view schematics, code, and more for the projects that you are learning about. Welcome back. So in today's video, I'm going to show you how to install applications from repositories on Ubuntu server using the command line. So one of the nice things about the Linux world is since the Linux world has been open source and more or less free for a long time, they were able to create a way to install applications onto server operating systems that was a hell of a lot easier than the Windows or the Mac world, right? So when you go to the Windows world, way back 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago. If you wanted to install a piece of software onto Windows Server, you would have to have the installation media, so whether it's a CD, a DVD, a USB, something like that, and you would have to have a license, possibly a couple of other pieces of information in order to be able to install that software onto your server. The reason being is because the people that created that software wanted to make sure that they got paid, so they force you to jump through all of these hoops. Well, the thing is, in the Linux world, since things were open source and more or less free, they didn't have to force you to jump through these stupid hoops, and so they came up with a system that made it very easy to install most of the software that you're going to be installing onto your Ubuntu server. So essentially what you're able to do is you're able to use a command called apt-get in the Ubuntu world, the Debian world, and what that does is able to go out to repositories on the internet and simply be able to download software applications from the internet onto your server and install them. Easy as pie, no problems. You don't need any licensing keys. You don't need to jump through any hoops because, again, for the most part in the Linux world, those aren't required. So what you're able to do is if you're going to be installing Apache, PHP, MySQL, MariaDB, let's say 95% of the software that you're going to be installing onto a Linux server within your career, you're able to use this apt-get command. It's able to go out to the internet, pull down all the files, be able to install it. Easy peasy, no big deal. Now, to be clear, remember when we talk about the Linux world and we talk about whether or not Linux is open source and is free, remember, you don't want to make blanket statements. It's not a good idea to make blanket statements about anything. So there is proprietary software in the Linux world, there is non-open source software in the Linux world, and there is software you have to pay for in the Linux world. So if you have to install a piece of software where you have to have some kind of installation media and license keys and all of that, if you're going to try to install that, all you do is you look for the documentation for that type of software and basically just run through the steps that they tell you to go through. So I'm not going to show you how to install software from a non-repository way, simply because you're probably actually not going to run into that very often. And if you do, they'll have the instructions. So the standard way that you're going to be installing software is through this apt-get command. It is important to understand, we talk about distributions and forks in the Linux world. This is another thing to remember with forks, is in the Debian world, you're going to be using apt-get install to be able to install software from these repositories. If you're in the Red Hat world, you'll be using a command called yum. So again, this is one of those things where I talk about where I'm not going to tell you what distribution you should use. I'm not going to say what the best distribution is, but this is one of those problems that you run into where you run into environments where you have multiple different distributions of Linux running for no good reason, is when you sit down to troubleshoot or do some kind of maintenance on one of these servers, if you have a CentOS and that requires yum and that requires specific commands, and then you have Ubuntu server that uses apt-get and it uses certain commands, and then you're using something else, this is one of the reasons why it can be a real pain in the butt for the different distributions and the different forks, is because if you have multiple versions of Linux running within your environment, you sit down to a server, you think you're just going to do something very simple as far as maintenance is concerned, and then again you're having to go do a Google search to figure out, oh, I'm used to using Ubuntu and this is Cent. Oh, what am I going to do here? So that is just something to keep in mind. What I'm talking about today is for the Ubuntu or the Debian world. If you're in CentOS, Red Hat, Fedora, they use something called yum, and we're not going to be dealing with that today. So when we're dealing with the apt-get command, the first thing that we need to realize is that we are going to need escalated privileges in order to run this, right? So to be able to install or uninstall software from the server, it makes sense that you should be a root level user. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the sudo command. So sudo, then we use apt-get, so that is the command. Then the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to use the update argument. So what the update does is you have a library basically installed on your Ubuntu server with the information from the repository. So the different applications that are available, where their locations are, all of that type of stuff, basically a text type file. So all the update command does, it simply updates that library. So think of it as a library, basically all the information where different packages are stored, that type of thing. So the first thing you want to do is you want to update. Why this is important is there may be a new version of the software that you're going to download and install. So let's say Apache 2 or Nginx, something like that. They may have come out with a new version since you originally stood up your Ubuntu server. So by doing the update command, you can just make sure that you're getting the latest version of whatever it is you're going to install. Past that, then you're simply going to do the install command. So what you do is you do sudo space apt-get space install, and then whatever it is that you're installing. Now again, this is the Linux world. You got to know what it is you're installing. So if it's Apache 2, if it's MySQL, whatever else, basically what's going to happen with the apt-get install is it's going to take that package, it's going to take what you're asking for, it's going to go up, it's going to find that, then it's going to try to install. And so since this is the command line, right, if you type in the right package, you will get the right package. If you type in the wrong package, you will get the wrong package. And if you type in something it doesn't understand, then you won't get anything at all. So it is very important to be thinking about this when you start installing software onto your server, is make sure you know the name of the package that you're going for. So today we're going to be going for something called Apache 2. So that's the latest version of the Apache web server. So again, one of those things, if you don't know what package you're going for, just do a Google search of, install Apache onto Ubuntu server, and then you'll see some documentation on what you'll be looking for. So just keep that in mind, as you do need to know what package you're going to try to be installing. Once you've installed it, basically you do the install, it goes through, it'll ask you, do you really want to do this? You click yes, you click no. If you click yes, it'll run through the little installation process. So it'll download the software, it'll install the software, it's seamless and it's easy, no big deal. Now depending on what software you're installing, there may be prompts for things like creating usernames and passwords. Again, that simply depends on what software you're installing. Past that, the next argument that we're going to look at is sudo space apt-get, then upgrade. And so what upgrade allows you to do is it allows you to upgrade the packages that are already installed on your Linux system. So if you have Apache installed and MySQL installed, all these different packages installed, and you want to make sure they're updated, they're upgraded to the latest version, you would use the upgrade command. And so that'll simply upgrade the packages that are on your system. That's pretty simple. Then finally, we're going to look at removing or uninstalling the software that you've installed onto your Ubuntu server. The first argument you can use is remove. So sudo space apt-get space remove, and then whatever the package is. Today it will be Apache 2. The interesting thing with the remove command is basically what it does is it removes all the functionality of whatever the software is, but it leaves the configuration files. So like with Apache 2 vhosts, if you have a bunch of configuration files and you want to leave them for some reason, you would use the remove command. You completely remove the ability for Apache 2 to function. You remove the software, but you leave those configuration files. So that can be valuable. Think about if you stand up a database server. And let's say that database server is normally going to be the database for a different web server. So you have a web server over here, it's doing its thing, it needs to be able to push and pull data to a database server. Well, let's say when you're standing up that database server, you decide to turn it into a full-fledged LAMP server for migration tasks, right? You got to go through these migration tasks, you have scripts to run, all that kind of stuff. So you say, I'm going to make this a full-fledged LAMP server. I want to install Apache, MySQL, PHP, all of that on there. Basically get all the data working, functioning, doing everything that it's supposed to do. And then once I'm done, I then want to remove Apache. Because remember, every piece of functionality on a server, Apache, PHP, MySQL, whatever else, not only is it a piece of functionality for your infrastructure, but it's also a vulnerability to hackers, right? So if you don't need functionality, get the hell rid of it, right? So if you have Apache on a server, but you're not actually using it as a web server, you want to remove that so that hackers can't get in there and possibly compromise your database server by compromising the Apache server. So that's what a lot of people do, right? Or a lot of hackers do is, let's say you install FTP onto your web server or onto your database server. Let's say you install Apache onto your database server. And so what the hacker wants to do is the hacker wants to compromise your database server. But your database component's pretty secure. They can't get into the database side. So what they might try to do is they might try to hack in through the FTP service that's open or through the Apache web server. What they can do is they can get in through the Apache web server. Once they're able to get in that way, then they can go and to attack the database server. So any service that's not being used on your Linux server, you basically want to get rid of. But let's say you're sitting there and thinking, well, I want to get rid of it. I don't want the vulnerability to be there. But I may need to use Apache on this server in the future, again, for migrations or maintenance or something like that. So I want to leave the configuration files. So what you do is you use the remove, so sudo space apt-get space remove Apache 2. That will delete the Apache software, but leave the configuration files. So if you reinstall Apache 2 in the future, all those configuration files are there, and then you can just keep moving, right? So that's something to think about. The final command is purge. The final argument is purge. So sudo space apt-get space purge Apache 2 or whatever the name is. What that does is that deletes the application and all the configuration files too. So that's basically like, nope, I don't want this on my server anymore. Get the hell rid of it. And if you use the purge command, it'll get rid of the software and the configuration files. And so that's one of those things to be thinking about, again, when you're doing system administration. Do you simply want to remove the application, leave the configuration files, or do you want it to all be gone? So with that, let's go over to the computer so I can show you how this works. So here we are at my computer. You can notice up here though, if you look at the title, if you look at the name of the virtual machine that I have running, it is Ubuntu Server Clone. And so this is something to be thinking about. Like now that you're starting to go in and modify configuration files, actually install software, uninstall software, one thing to think about is keeping a clean machine and then essentially creating copies of the clean machine to play with, right? So I have an absolutely clean installation of Ubuntu Server. So this is Ubuntu Server. It's just plain Jane installation. The only thing it has on it is a user account for Bob, 123456, and nothing else. And so this is nice. So let's say I'm sitting here and I'm playing with this clone. I'm doing some modifications. I'm doing some changes. Maybe I crash something. Maybe I do something stupid. And I want to be able to just start from square one. What I can do is I can create a clone of this Ubuntu server. So if I right click or long click in the MacBook Pro world, you can click on this button called Clone. You then, basically what this is going to do is it's going to create a complete copy of that virtual machine. So you give it a name, so Ubuntu Server Clone, you give the location, MAC address policy. I would say unless you know what you're doing, just leave the MAC address policy as it is. Then you can click continue. Clone type, do you want a full clone or a linked clone? So a full clone, again, this is what I would recommend. This basically copies the entire virtual hard drive. And so you have a brand new virtual hard drive. You can throw that on a USB flash drive and move it to a different computer or whatever else. There is a linked clone. What a linked clone does is it creates a file that only has the differences between the original hard drive and the clone that you've created. That is something to think about, but you may run into some issues in the future. So I would generally say, unless you know what you're doing, you leave it with a full clone, and then you click clone button and you will get a clone. Essentially, this is a way to copy the virtual machine that you've created so that you can play around with a copy. If you screw things up, then you can delete the copy, create a new clone, go on from there. The nice thing about clones is it only takes, like, for it to go through the little clone process, it only takes like a minute or two. Right? So even in a virtual machine, if you want to install an operating system, it's a 10 or 15 minute task probably, maybe a little bit less than that, but it's going to take you at least 10 minutes if you want to install even Ubuntu server into a virtual machine. Whereas if you do a clone, you can spin up a clone in just a minute. The other thing too is to be thinking about, like, when you're doing experiments, when you're playing around, like once you've installed Apache, once you build a LAMP server, You can build your LAMP server with all your configurations. Then you create a clone of what you've created, and then again you play around with the clone, figure out what you do right, figure out what you do wrong, and then go back to the original and actually make the modifications that you want. So something to think about as you start playing with these virtual machines is to think about creating these clones. But anyways, with that, let's go to our Ubuntu server clone and actually start playing with this apt-get command. So of course, my server name or my login name is Bob, and my password is 123456. And we're going to log in and we get the basic stuff that we normally get. And so with that, we're just going to hit clear. We get a clear screen. The first thing is we're going to do sudo. So sudo apt-get and then update. So this is going to update the library, the information about where different software is, the current versions of software, all that kind of stuff. We hit enter. It's going to ask me for my password, 123456. Hit enter. Working, so it's connecting, it's going to repositories, it's getting the information, it's fetching the information, and there we go. So we can see that we had 252 kilobytes that were actually fetched. So again, this is one of those things. It's very easy to forget about. It's a stupid little command that's easy to forget about. But you know, there's 252 kilobytes of information that was actually downloaded. So depending on what you're installing, it might be relevant for you. With that, then. Just clear this out. Then what we're going to do is we're actually going to install Apache 2. So all we do is again sudo space apt-get space install. And so I know what I'm looking for. So I'm looking for Apache 2. Again, depending on what you're installing, it might be MySQL, it might be PHP, whatever else. Just space install space whatever you're installing. Then I press enter. Again, I have the timeout on the sudo for the password. You don't always have to put the password in. You get like a 15-minute timeout, so I didn't have to do that. And now it's actually installed. So it's enabling modules, it downloaded, and everything is now installed onto the Ubuntu server. So I'll just do clear, just to clear the screen. And now to do the upgrade, since we have Apache 2, I don't think we'll have any kind of upgrade, but we do sudo space apt-get upgrade. And so this will upgrade the packages that are installed, the software that's installed on our server. We hit enter, reading package list, building. After this operation, okay, so following packages will be upgraded. So libnis, libpam, okay, you can see all that. I'll just click yes, just to show you how this works. So again, the nice part is this is just going up, it's just connecting, it's downloading everything, and then it will install it, all nice and easy. Definitely a hell of a lot easier in the Windows world. And this is one of the reasons why, again, you go back 10 or 15 years, a lot of administrators really did prefer Linux over Windows. Remember, back in the days, right, if you wanted to install anything on Windows, you had to have those CDs, you had to have the licenses, you had to jump through all of these hoops, especially when they started putting that whole genuine authentication or whatever crap. You had to jump through a lot of hoops simply to be able to install software onto a Windows server. Whereas in the Linux world, this is how they've been doing it for decades. So can you imagine, again, and that's one of the reasons why the Linux sysadmins get so snarky, is can you imagine a process like this where it is so easy to download and install software, and then you go to the Windows world? I mean, you can kind of understand why they lost their minds just a little bit. Okay, so there we go, and we had the upgrade. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to show you the remove command. So the remove command gets rid of the application, but it doesn't get rid of the configuration files. So if I use a command, there's another command called whereas. So this is kind of cool. So whereas, you can actually feed it an application, and it will tell you the folders associated with that application. So we do whereas Apache 2, and so with here, if we take a look, this shows us the different folders that are associated with Apache 2. The main one that we're looking at is the etc / Apache 2. So this is where the configuration files for Apache 2 are located, right? So what we can see is currently Apache 2 is installed, and currently there is a folder for etc Apache 2. So what we're going to do is sudo apt-get remove. So we're simply doing remove right now, Apache 2. Then we're going to hit enter. So this is going to remove, basically uninstall the application without getting rid of the configuration files. So we do that. It's asking us the information. Of course, we say yes. Then it goes through, and it's now removing the application. So now Apache 2 is removed from this particular server. But what I want to show you is if we do where is, and we do Apache 2 again, if we take a look, you see how we still have that etc Apache 2 folder. So the configuration files for Apache 2 are still there. So we're like, oh no, we want to make sure the configuration files are gone. We want to get rid of Apache 2. So what we can do is sudo apt-get purge. It's a purge! Apache 2. Hit enter. It goes through. Do you really want to do it? Yes. Purging the configuration files, processing, blah, blah, blah. Then we type in where is again, Apache 2, and we hit enter. Basically what we can see here is that that etc folder is gone. So see how it has these folders here. So user sbin, user lib, and then etc. If we go down here, we can now see user sbin, user lib. The etc Apache 2 folder is no longer there. So that's where the configuration files were stored. So that's right here is the difference between remove and purge. And I mean, really, that's basically all there is to apt-get command for installing, upgrading, and uninstalling software on your Linux server. So there you go. That's all there is to being able to install software onto your Ubuntu server. Again, whether you're going to be installing Apache or Nginx or PHP or MySQL or MariaDB or most, again, it's the Linux world. So you always got, in the Linux world, you always got to say most. You always got to say most of the software that most people will ever run into, they can simply use this command to be able to download and install software. Again, I would argue 95% of the time there is, proprietary software out there that you may have to go through an installation process for. If you run into that software, just simply look at the documentation and figure it out that way. Generally in the Linux world, again, since most of it's open source and most of that open source is free, basically this is the process you go through. And it really does show you, I mean, look, the Linux admins, let's be honest, the Linux admins go way too far. They go way too far with their snottiness. But you can start to see, especially when you think about 15 or 20 years ago, why they might have had a little bit of a superiority complex over the Windows world. Again, as somebody who actually had to administer Windows NT 4.0 in the production environment, when you realize this is what Linux folks were dealing with 20 years ago compared to what the Windows NT folks were dealing with, you can see why they would think that this was a better way to do things. So that's one of the nice things with Linux. So whenever you're going to be using the apt-get command, again, always do make sure to use update. Even on a system you've installed other stuff, before you install anything from a repository, just run that update command so you make sure you're getting the latest and greatest. It will make life easier for you in the future. Then remember upgrade. And again, this is an important thing in the Linux world. One of the big problems of the Linux world is things break so unoften, they don't break. And so one of the issues in the Linux world is that many times the big problem with Linux is that people don't do preventative maintenance. Since it is so stable, since it is so reliable, people frankly forget to do things like update software. So do make sure every month or two, or at least once a frickin' year, I mean every month is what you should do, but at least once a year, run the upgrade command, actually do updates for your system, because that's where you can run into a lot of problems. That's where you see there are vulnerabilities that people found out like 5 or 6 or even 10 years ago, and there are still servers on the internet that are vulnerable to these very old flaws simply because people forgot literally just to update the software. So do make sure to use the sudo apt-get upgrade to update your software. Do realize though, if there's major new versions, so this is like, there's little versions and then big versions, big differences. So the upgrade will do all the little versions. If there's a major improvement, there's a major basically different version of a piece of software that comes out, you may then have to actually install that latest version without the upgrade. That might be an additional thing, so just kind of keep that in mind. Then you've got remove to remove the software, but that keeps configuration files, whether you want to do that, whether you don't want to do that. That's up to you. And then purge, what purge will do is it'll go through, it'll wipe out the configuration files, and it'll get rid of the software. And so you'll be back to square one, more or less. So that's how the apt-get commands works. As with all of this, there's more to it. There's so much more to it. So if you're interested in this, if you're interested in the concept of repositories, because that's one thing, like with being able to download and install software from repositories, you can actually add repositories, right? So there's the basic repositories that Ubuntu knows about. You can actually add repositories to Ubuntu's list. But again, that's one of those, if you need to, if you want to, realize that's a possibility. So go out and figure out how to do it. Do a Google search on that. There are some other interesting things with the apt-get command that, again, 99% of the time you will never use. 99% of the people and 99% of the time you'll never need it. But if you're really going to be a power user in the Linux world, again, take a look at the man pages, take a look at some of the information about apt-get. There are some other interesting things that you can do with the command. And as always, I enjoy doing this video and look forward to seeing you at the next one.